You already know what falling in love too fast looks like. You've seen it in every romantic film you've ever watched. You've read about it in novels. You've heard it in the stories people tell at weddings, how they knew from the very first moment, how it felt like something they'd never experienced before, how the other person made them feel seen in a way no one ever had. You've maybe felt it yourself. That rush, that certainty, that feeling of finally, we have a word for it, we have songs for it. We have an entire industrial complex of stories built around it. The person who loves quickly, the person who says I love you after 2 weeks, the person who calls you their soulmate before you finished your first month together. We called them romantic. We called them brave. We called them the kind of love worth finding. That framing is exactly what makes them so dangerous. Because here's what most people are never told. It's a person who falls in love with you in two. WEEKS is not falling in love with you. They are falling in love with a projection they have placed over the outline of your body. And what happens when the real you begins to show through has been documented extensively in psychiatric literature, in court records, and in emergency rooms across every continent on Earth. Asterisk, we built this impression ourselves. It started, as most dangerous ideas do, in childhood. Disney gave us love at first sight before we were old enough to evaluate it. Cinderella, Snow White, Sleeping Beauty. In each story, a man who has known a woman for hours, sometimes minutes, commits his entire life to her. And this was not presented as a warning, it was presented as the point of the story, it was the ending, it was what we were supposed to want. Hollywood then spent the following decades reinforcing the framework. In 1989, Meg Ryan and Tom Hanks built the architecture of romantic certainty into When Harry Met Sally. In 1994, Speed gave us the idea that extreme emotional pressure accelerates love into something real and lasting. In 2004, The Notebook canonized Obsessive Pursuit, a man who writes 365 letters without a single response as the gold standard of romantic devotion. By the time social media arrived, the infrastructure was complete. TikTok accounts dedicated to twin flames, the idea that two people are cosmically destined for instantaneous, overwhelming connection, now accumulate hundreds of millions of views. Reddit forums document the one experiences with the language of spiritual revelation. Instagram couples perform certainty at timelines that, in any clinical context, would trigger immediate assessment. We handed an entire generation a map to a place that does not exist, and we told them that anyone who arrived there quickly had found the real thing. What it actually is something that has a clinical name, a documented mechanism, and a measurable rate of harm that the romance industry has never once mentioned. The phenomenon has been studied under several overlapping frameworks. None of them are romantic. In 1979, psychologist Dorothy Tennov published Love and Limerence, The Experience of Being in Love, introducing the clinical term limerence, an involuntary cognitive state characterized by intrusive thinking about a specific person, acute sensitivity to the target's signals, and an overwhelming need for reciprocation. Tennov's research across 500 subjects found that limerence produced a near-identical neurological profile to obsessive-compulsive disorder, intrusive, unwanted, ego-dystonic thoughts about another person that the subject is unable to voluntarily suppress. The neurochemistry behind rapid, intense attachment is not mysterious. A 2005 study published in the Journal of Neurophysiology by Dr. Helen Fisher and colleagues at Rutgers University used fMRI imaging to examine the brains of individuals who described themselves as intensely in love. The results showed sustained activation of the ventral tegmental area, the same dopamine-producing region activated by cocaine alongside elevated cortisol levels, consistent with acute stress response. The brain experiencing rapid romantic attachment is not in a state of clarity. It is in a state of chemical dysregulation. The clinical concern is not the feeling itself. It is what the feeling does to perception. A 2014 study published in Psychological Science found that individuals in states of intense early attachment showed a measurable 23% reduction in activity in the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for risk assessment, impulse control, and critical evaluation of social information. Love bombing, the specific behavioral pattern of overwhelming affection, attention, and premature commitment, has been studied as a documented strategy employed by individuals with narcissistic personality disorder and borderline personality disorder. Dr. Carla Marie Manley, clinical psychologist and author of Date Smart, has documented that love bombing operates as an intentional or semi-intentional mechanism, creating dependency before the target has accumulated sufficient information to make an informed assessment of the relationship. The timeline is not accidental. The speed is the mechanism. Yvonne Eldorado was 47 years old when she met the man who would later be convicted of her attempted murder. The location was Sacramento, California. The year was 2016 by his account, and by hers in early messages later submitted. As evidence, he fell in love immediately. Within 3 days, he had told her she was the person he had been waiting for. Within 10 days, he had suggested they move in together. Within 3 weeks, he had described their relationship as predestined, something neither of them could have prevented even if they'd tried. Yvonne described it later in court testimony as the most seen she had ever felt. He remembered everything. She mentioned he anticipated her needs before she expressed them. He called her in texts that were read aloud during the trial, his reason for existing. By week 6, the relationship had turned, not with a single incident, with a gradual, systematic dismantling of the life she had existed in before him. Her friendships became, in his framing, threats to what they had. Her adult children became sources of divided loyalty. Her phone became evidence. By month 4, she had left her apartment and moved into his home. Within 6 months, she had no independent social contact he had not approved. On March 14, 2017, 8 months after the first message, Yvonne Eldorado was hospitalized with injuries consistent with sustained assault. The discharge notes from Mercy General Hospital described blunt force trauma to the orbital socket, fractured ribs on the left side, contusions across the upper arms consistent with defensive wounds. The detective assigned to the case, speaking to the Sacramento Bee in 2018, noted that this pattern, the overwhelming early affection, the rapid escalation of commitment, the systematic isolation appeared in virtually identical form across every intimate partner violence case in his 14-year career. This is not an isolated case. The research on rapid romantic attachment and downstream harm is not thin. A 2017 analysis published in the journal Partner Abuse examined 1,104 documented cases of intimate partner violence across the United States, United Kingdom, and Australia. The researchers, led by Dr. John Hamill of John F. Kennedy University, found that in 73% of cases where physical violence occurred within the first year of a relationship, the relationship had been characterized in early stages by what subjects described as overwhelming or unusually rapid expressions of love and commitment from the perpetrating partner. In 2019, researchers at the University of Auckland published findings in the Journal of Interpersonal Violence documenting what they called the accelerated intimacy pathway, a pattern in which perpetrators of coercive control consistently reported, when interviewed, that they had experienced their feelings as completely genuine and involuntary. They did not describe strategy. They described certainty. The clinical literature on narcissistic personality disorder, which affects an estimated 6.2% of the general population, according to a 2008 study published in the Journal of Clinical Psychiatry by Stinson and colleagues, consistently identifies love bombing as a characteristic early relationship behavior. The NPD individual does not experience the rapid attachment as manufactured. The neurological architecture produces genuine intensity and genuine collapse when the target fails to sustain the projected ideal. In the United Kingdom, the Susie Lamplugh Trust, the country's leading personal safety charity, has documented that the average duration between first contact and first incident of coercive control in cases reported to their helpline is 47 days. 40-7 days. This is not romance. This is a documented clinical pathway with a beginning, a mechanism, and a measurable endpoint that we have spent decades teaching people to run toward. Here is what the research makes clear, and what the cultural narrative has never once addressed. The behavior is not simple. It is not reflexive. Effective love bombing requires, whether consciously executed or not, a sophisticated set of cognitive operations that most people would, in any other context, recognize as evidence of dangerous capability. It requires reading the target, identifying the specific emotional architecture, what they have been denied, what they have always wanted, what particular shape of attention will bypass their critical evaluation. This is not guesswork. Documented accounts from survivors consistently describe the experience as being understood in ways no one else had managed. That precision is not accidental. It requires mirroring. It's becoming, in the early period, a reflection of what the target needs to see. Research by Dr. Martha Stout, clinical psychologist and author of The Sociopath Next Door, documents that individuals capable of sustained social mirroring demonstrate elevated scores on tests, measuring theory of mind, the cognitive capacity to model another person's internal state with accuracy. It requires pacing. The escalation from warmth to enmeshment to isolation does not happen all at once. It happens in increments small enough that no individual step triggers alarm. That is, not instinct. That is a sequenced, adaptive, cognitively demanding process executed against someone. His prefrontal cortex has already been partially disabled by the neurochemical conditions the behavior itself created. What makes this behavior dangerous is not the intensity of the feeling, it is the precision of the delivery. No behavior this consistent survives without infrastructure. The infrastructure here is not hidden. It is everywhere you have ever looked for guidance on relationships. The family that asked, when you described the relationship at Thanksgiving, whether he seemed really into you, and received the answer completely from the very beginning, and called that a good sign. The friends who described the speed as exciting rather than clinical. The coworker who said she wished her partner had been that certain that early. Every social response to rapid attachment is calibrated to reward rather than examine it. This is not carelessness. It is the downstream consequence of 60 years of manufactured narrative about what love is supposed to look like. Dating applications have structurally accelerated the problem. A 2021 study by the Pew Research Center found that 48% of Americans who had used a dating app described experiencing someone who escalated emotional intimacy at a pace they found uncomfortable. Yet in the same survey, 31% described rapid emotional escalation as a positive indicator of genuine interest. The population cannot agree on whether the behavior is a warning or a reward. The research on social conformity, beginning with Solomon Asch's landmark 1951 experiments and extended by decades of subsequent work, consistently demonstrates that individuals will override their own perceptual judgments when the social group around them provides consensus. If everyone around you is describing this person's intensity as romantic, the neurological conditions that might otherwise generate caution have already been socialized away. The behavior thrives not because people are unintelligent. It thrives because the cognitive and social conditions surrounding it have been carefully optimized across generations of cultural production to make scrutiny feel like ingratitude. The conditions producing this behavior are not stable. They are accelerating the loneliness epidemic, documented in a 2023 advisory by U.S. Surgeon General Dr. Vivek Murthy, which described loneliness as affecting more than half of American adults, has produced a population with lowered resistance to rapid intimacy. People who are hungry do not evaluate food carefully. Dating applications have compressed the timeline of romantic assessment from months to minutes. Tinder processes approximately 1.6 billion swipes per day. The platform's architecture rewards immediate intensity. Users who generate rapid emotional engagement retain better. The infrastructure of modern connection has been engineered by people whose financial interest lies in engagement to accelerate exactly the pathway that the clinical literature identifies as dangerous. Social media has made the performance of rapid certainty a currency. Relationship goals, content, couples who describe immediate, overwhelming Preordained connection accumulates engagement at rates that algorithmically amplify it above content, depicting measured, gradual attachment. The most visible relationships are the ones that moved fastest. The habitat of this behavior is not shrinking. Every structural condition of modern life, the loneliness, the apps, the algorithm is expanding it. And here's the hardest thing to hold in your mind all at once. The person who falls in love with you in 2 weeks is not evil. They are not, in most documented cases, deliberately predatory. They are not calculating in any conscious sense that they themselves would recognize. They are running a program. An ancient one built into the human attachment system over hundreds of thousands of years that in a specific environment, under specific pressures, produces specific behaviors. The rapid attachment, the overwhelming certainty, the consuming focus on a single other person. These were, in the environments that built them, adaptive. They are not evil. They are evolution. Running in the wrong century, on the wrong neurological hardware. In a world moving too fast for the system to calibrate correctly, that does not make them safe. Understanding the mechanism does not neutralize it. A fire is not evil. It is still capable of burning everything you have. The research is not asking you to distrust love. It is asking you to understand that love, real, durable, evidence-based love, is not built in 2 weeks. It is built across thousands of ordinary moments, across conflict and resolution, across the slow accumulation of accurate information about who another person actually is. The person who tells you they love you before they know you does not love you. They love the space where you were standing. And when you begin to fill that space with the complicated, inconsistent, irreducible reality of who you actually are, ... the question is not whether they will notice the difference. The question is what they do. And they do. You already know what falling in love too fast looks like. What you may not have known is that you were supposed to be afraid.